and welcome to another episode of Casting Views, a podcast where we take a subject each week, something that interests us, something that might be in your news, and well, cast some views. This week, I think I've probably got COVID again,
Yes, you probably have, haven't you?
Dan. So if
Lou
you
has
just
been coughing coughing his proverbial guts up.
Yeah, I've been trying my absolute best to get it all out just before the episode starts. But if you do at some point just hear a random bout of silence from me, which is rather unusual, then that's probably because I've muted my microphone to have my fit and then come back. So Dan's probably going to have an amazing time editing this episode.
This is gonna be the easiest one for people to recognise. So Lou is the one who's gonna be coughing throughout and his verse get worse, and me down here is gonna be the one who sounds sprightly throughout. There you go, it's
Exactly.
already muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I already muted while Dan was having his little. I was just like, while he's having his monologue, let me go, let me go.
Except I've had some wine before we start recording, so I think I'm already starting to get sleepy. So
This week, how have you been, just generally speaking, then, before we get into it?
Yeah, okay. It's gonna be weird the way I think I'm releasing them. So we obviously just recently recorded with Leo and we had a good episode, which I can't wait. We won't spoil it, but I can't wait for people to hear that there'll be some. Well, I'm wondering if this might be one of the first episodes that gets us quite a bit of a contact. I'm hoping for.
Yeah, will this be our first one-star review, do you reckon?
Yeah, well, certain fandoms, yeah, listening. Yeah, no, it's all right. It's all right. It's just chilling. I'm playing my way through the sweets that I bought for the trick or treaters at Halloween, knowing full well that we weren't going to get any trick or treaters, but I always do it because just in case. So actually, I didn't tell you. I did put it on Twitter. I bought these fun size bags of Snickers and Milky Ways and Mars bars, things like that. Bought one of those. First pack I pull out was a bag of Maltesers. It was sealed but empty. Sealed but empty, and I added Maltesers, and they've still not heard. They didn't respond. How frustrating was that? Sealed. So nobody had opened it, nobody had taken it. So
That's just where
annoying.
the portion sizes are going, though, isn't it? Let's be honest.
If that's not fate telling me, yeah, no, you don't want to be eating more chocolate.
And also, can I just say, where you've turned around and said bought chocolates for the trick or treaters I know that haven't come, I definitely know that you're sitting with all the lights off, right, with the curtains closed, knowing full well that you don't want anyone knocking on your door. So that's how you're presenting it. But you've still bought the sweets anyway.
I'm recording this under the table.
Yeah, I can confirm now. I can see Dan. And he's sat with candlelight.
How's your week been?
Yeah, all right. Apart from the fact that I feel like a bag of shit, but what can you do? It's one of those things, unfortunately. I feel like I've gone through a real huge journey. If anybody listens to the episodes and can plot both instances where I've had COVID, my broken elbow, me likely having COVID now again, it'd be fantastic. Because I feel like there's more time I've spent with COVID while we've been recording these than without.
It is funny, isn't it? And how many I wonder how many other podcasts where they'll look back and think that this is real moment in time. Because I had it for a couple of episodes. It hit me when we did the Sean Louis, right? And I
Yeah.
didn't want to cancel it because I felt really bad that day. And then we had Antonio, didn't we? And like and like I said, again, I felt bad for that, but I was so out of it on that episode. So between the two of us, yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting period of time where people look back and see how many other pods have been affected by illness during this time for so long.
Yeah, and you know what though? It's actually a cool thing, and we're like again like getting off on a tangent before we've even started. But it'll be a cool thing to turn around and be like, "What was the coronavirus pandemic like?" Be like, "Well, listen to our podcast episodes because we fucking had it while we were doing." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Listen to episodes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. And the thing is, it could just be now colds, isn't it? Because 2 years of isolation and not mixing, and now colds are probably back in circulation, right?
yeah, that's what it is. Like
So,
my body's like that meme where it's like, "Nobody panic, nobody panic." My immune system's freaking out. Um,
what the hell is this?
it's like contact with the outside world, germs. Right, before we get into the episode fully, which is we're going to tease just before our little promo, it's about controversial, extreme television. I think is the way that we're going to present it.
Yeah, I think we really enjoyed our chat on reality TV,
Yeah,
didn't we?
yeah.
like I said, the way I'm releasing these from the way we recorded it is actually going to be our last episode. And I think you've wanted to do kind of something about this extreme TV and TV that wouldn't be allowed almost
Yeah.
nowadays for a while, haven't you? And I think you really like the idea of following it on. And yeah, I think it makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think that it's an interesting one. It leads on nicely from our reality TV series. But prior to that, I will hand over to you because I know that you've got the official bits to do before we kick into it.
The housekeeping, the promo. So, yeah, so a promo from a friend of ours, and actually, this friend is going to be hopefully again, if we can get everything signed off, he'll be appearing on our show in a couple of weeks. So it's Justin from the Movie Wire. So Justin has a weekly podcast reviewing movies. His reviews are really funny. If he really dislikes a film. I'm not going to say a couple of comments he's done because you just have to listen to him. But he's got a certain way of putting his dislike for certain films. At the time of recording, it's the Halloween episode. So the way he describes, he's reviewing the Terrifier 2. So yeah, he's got some choice phrases in that. So yeah, we'll hear from him now, and yeah, hopefully you'll hear from him on our show. But yeah, check out Justin on the Movie Wire.
In a world with so many movies to choose from, one man has created the go-to podcast for reviews of hot and trending movies, so you know what's worth your time. The Movie Wire Podcast with host Justin Henson. Hear Justin's movie verdict wherever you listen to podcasts. Tune in to The Movie Wire today.
And we're back from Dan's housekeeping. Right, now, this episode, I don't know if you want to kick it off to begin with, or you want me to kick it off to begin with, but yeah, it's kind of going to be a controversial, extreme television stuff that we'd look at and think, fuck, how did they do that? There's a lot to pick from, to be fair. It's a it's a really, really broad.
The problem is there's too much. I've chosen ones that I remember. Well, two I definitely remember watching. The other I remember as a kid hearing about it, so I've covered it. But there are just so many that we're not even gonna touch now. I'm happy to start off if you want because I've got light-hearted, very serious light-hearted, whereas I think yours is gonna start serious and just progress in serious levels possibly. So do you want me to kick off? Do you want me to
Yeah,
kick
go
off
on
with
then.
one?
Kick off with something
All right.
light-hearted, and then I'll drag I'll drag it down.
I'm going to start with a program called The Word. You're going to have obviously been too young for it, but I don't know if you've even heard of it. So it was, if I remember right, it aired between 1993 and 95. I like to call them like a magazine show, if you know what I mean, where it's a little bit of everything. But it was aimed at a certain market, and when I say that, so it aired on a Friday night. I think it was around 11 o'clock or half 11 at night. So it was at the time when the pubs had a kicking out time. So it was appealing to the late teens, early 20s, drunk. You've been out, you've got pissed, and you settled down for this. Now, it was actually a really interesting show. Firstly, I've actually written down here banging theme tune because it had one of the best. It's 808 State, who I still love. So it had a great tune. Certain elements of it are going to be quite problematic, but it launched the career of a lot of famous people, which you probably don't know all of them, but Terry Christian started on there. Mark Lamar was on it.
Oh, okay.
Danny Bear, yeah, Danny Bear, Amanda Decadene, Katie Puckrick, among others. They all hosted it, and it was a really loud, brash, in your face. But it also, if I'm correct, it had the first UK performance of Oasis and Nirvana. So it was quite, it's quite a big show at the time, even though it was like 11 o'clock or midnight on a Friday night. So, like I said, I'm just trying to set the scene that it was quite influential at the time because of the kind of show it was. And it was almost like the first of that type of thing being I want to say laddish, but it wasn't necessarily catering for a male audience, but it was that kind of really, want of better words, spunky kind of in your face program. So having said that it had all these firsts and it was quite important in terms of how it set off certain TV shows. For a period of time, I think it was about a year within its runtime, they had a section called The Hopefuls.
Okay.
I actually remember seeing them and it stuck with me. So what we're talking about 19 years later, are we talking about? Yeah, and it still stuck with me, some of these things. No, actually, what? Yeah, yeah. I can't add up. No, it's 30 years later, isn't it? So it's always 30 years later. Some of this has stuck with me. So the hopefuls were they had normal, sort of air quotes, normal people come on And the premise and the line they said was, "I would do anything to be on TV." My word, that was never truer than on this show. Now, I'm going to start with some of the ones that we think are going to, aren't as outrageous now because we see them on other shows. But again, remember, I'm a Celebrity. I don't know, when did it start? Are we saying the 2000s? Probably I'm a
I would
Celebrity. Get
think
me
so.
out there.
Yeah, yeah, I would think so.
So bear in mind, this predates that then by at least sort of 9 to 10 years, right? So you had a man eating sheep's testicles, a woman sitting in a bath of maggots, a woman eating sheep eyes, someone, I couldn't remember if it was man or woman, wearing sandals full of dog poo, basically dog shit. They put sandals and make them wear it. Then it kind of starts up in the ante a couple of times. So they had a man lick an old age pensioner's foot live on TV. They had a man snog a fish, a woman taking a bath in horse manure and urine, horse urine. These are the ones that I actually remember. These are the next ones are the ones that stick in my head. So they had a man snogging a grandma. And when I say grandma, I think she was around 70, in her 70s. They had him full on snogger. Yeah, yeah. They had another guy. As oh, you got to remember, these are all. I think these are all people in like their 20s. These weren't like young, like either impressionable teenagers. These are people in their early 20s, I think, who just wanted to be on TV. You had a man drink pint of his own vomit.
Right.
Yeah, so basically,
Fucking
as
hell.
yeah, yeah, as he says, as he says it here, he chundered into a pint glass and then had to put down what came up. Number 2 on this list was a man, this was a 20-year-old at the time, I've got some details of this, had to eat a pubic hair sandwich.
Right.
Yep. Basically, he had to nibble his way through a handful of hairy things on crackers. Well, it says sandwich, but yeah, basically it's crackers, cream crackers with pubic hair on it. Then the other one, the final one I've got written here was basically it was a woman from Devon who, so they had, an overweight man who I think had been either running on a treadmill or cycling on an exercise bike to get him really sweaty. And I think if I remember right, she then stuck her finger in his belly button and then sucked her finger to basically
Fucking
lick his sweat. She was basically scooping the sweat off of the inside of his belly button and licking her finger. And I kind of put this in because I think whilst like I said, the ones I listed at the start, like the eating sheep's eyes and sitting in maggots, feel quite okay by today's standards because we do have I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here and things like that. I think the things like the licking the man's foot, the snogging the grandma, the the drinking your own puke, the pubic hair sandwich, and the licking the sweat of overweight person's belly button. It's just it's degrading, isn't it, and
yeah.
humiliating.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't think we'd ever be able to get anywhere. And what you got to remember, this was as well Channel 4. Now I know Channel 4 has always been seen here for anyone who's not aware of Channel 4. It's kind of been seen as a slightly before cable and satellite come along. It was a slightly edgier channel.
Yeah, yeah, always.
I still think this pushed the limit, especially in a show which, like I said, was getting these big bands on and were having their own shocking moments in terms of some of the bands that coming on and the guests who were being drunk and like the swearing and stuff like that. This just felt it is degrading. It's tried, like I said, especially when it proceeded with saying something like, "Hi, I'm Joe from Swindon, and I'd do anything to get on TV."
Yeah.
And then they're downing you, and it is just it's that level of we're trying to humiliate you. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. This was a show predicated around the humiliation of the people that were competing.
The thing is, it's not even competing because it's not even a competition. It was just that was a film segment, sorry, with and it was then put into the shows. So, or it was a little bit done live. They weren't going to win anything. They weren't guaranteed fame. I don't even think any of them probably did go on to any sort of fame other than maybe 10 minutes in the newspaper the next day.
Yeah, that's
Um,
what the horrific thing is, isn't it? Is like you wouldn't even use that as a claim to fame, and you'd probably be really embarrassed if you were on that now.
exactly. And, you do want, I always think a yardstick of things is would you look back on it and be proud of what you've done?
Yeah, that's a good example. That's a really, really good example.
The fact though that it did have I've got it here. Yeah, Nirvana. It was Nirvana's international debut of "Smells Like Teen Spirit," and actually on the time, so that was a had a bit of a shocking moment. Not like for what we're talking about, but he declared at the time Courtney Love to be the best fuck in the world on the show. You had a female singer guitarist remove her jeans and underwear during the performance, so she was full frontal nudity. There's a TV debut of Oasis playing Supersonic. Rage Against the Machine were playing Killing in the Name, which resulted in a stage invasion. So it had its own moments anyway. This just felt like, whilst that you could argue was chaotic program and it invited chaos, this just
Right.
felt untasteful or distasteful. Sorry, like I said, the eating the pubic hair sandwich. I mean, probably I don't know now. Maybe that with the crazy trends we see on TikTok and stuff, maybe you would get fame. But back then, I think you would have been ridiculed. I mean, like I said, it was 11 o'clock on a Friday night.
That's not even. It's not prime time. It's just like, yeah, like you said, it is the people that are like the pissheads after the pub that are watching.
Like I said, I think it's the ones with specifically with the people. I mean, if you want to snog a fish, that's your issue. But yeah, licking. Oh, that was it. Yeah, the licking someone's false teeth, licking a pensioner's false teeth. So if I remember right, I think it was an old guy. I think he takes the false teeth out there and then and gives them to the guy for him to lick. And I don't know, maybe some people might think, well, that's not bad. I'd do it. I just think because this predates all these shock shows like Jackass
Yeah.
and the ones we had over here. And it was just, I think, like I said, the few I mentioned about the licking the sweat, the pubic hair, drinking the puke, and the snog the grandma and the licking the foot, I think yeah, it's just distasteful. And like I said, I don't think any shows probably would, no, not any mainstream, like main TV channels will go near that now.
Yeah, I don't know how you'd like get consent to like get people to sign up for that sort of thing as well, because like nowadays TV companies are really heavy with that sort of thing. So I feel like it's just not something that you could put on television.
I just feel sorry for these people because if they would just had waited another 10 years or if they were born like 10 years later, they would have had TikTok,
Yeah,
Facebook,
yeah,
Instagram, YouTube, and they would have been famous, bless them. So,
yeah, yeah. Like nowadays, they could have got famous for dancing to some little baby, but instead they decided to eat their own vomit and got fuck all.
or just bobbing their head to a song on TikTok, you know.
Yeah, it's like fully one of those situations where it's like a guy's like, I drank a pint of my own vomit and all I got was this shit t-shirt.
Yeah. And some little kid has his brother Charlie bite his finger and they become millionaires from that.
Oh my god, that's another one. The most unreal. That's a great episode. That is like unlikely superstars, like unlikely internet superstars.
Right, it's going up on my board. We're doing it. No, say no more. Say no more. I will finish it by saying again, I know it does sound weird, but it does stand weirdly, it does stand out as like a fairly influential show in terms of the it being like a show aimed at a young audience with
Yeah,
like a mature theme, but having some proper standout moments, like I said with the bands. I think you said it once on one of our shows. Were they high or something in a room when they came up with an idea and said, "Yes, sod it, let's just do it." To me, it also links back to reality TV show that you could argue that this is almost like the precursor to people wanting to do anything, well, like they said themselves, to humiliate themselves to get on TV.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's what it is. It's like you're playing on the desperation of a person, and I think that's where the problem with these TV shows come in. So I feel like to an extent, when you look at like I'm a Celebrity nowadays, it's different because it's celebrities. You know, it's for entertainment. You know, there's always going to be a limit in reality to what they're doing. There's specialists that are around them to make sure they're not hurt. And in reality, if the celebrities can't take part, they're exempt from these things.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah, yeah,
very, very controlled. Whereas that is just something that wasn't, and it was done for the purposes of humiliation. Whereas with this, it's like celebs trying to build their personal profile because they're
yeah.
like fallen off a little bit or whatever it might be. You know, it's a little bit different, I think.
And there will be one other thing, sorry, I say. So if this was 93, 95, I think Sky came out 88, 89 over here, but it wasn't necessarily massive then. So you got to remember, I think this was then when we had really like 4/5 main channels. People weren't necessarily exposed to hundreds of TV channels. They didn't have, net Freeview. We didn't have YouTube, etc. So it was for a large portion of the population. And again, we had a definitive kicking out time in the pubs. I think that was like 10:30 or something. It might have been then. So you would have had a huge section of the population watching this just
Yeah.
because there wasn't much else to do. So yeah, The Word. Like I said though, check it out. It really does have a great theme tune. In Your Face by 808 State. I've got to say that for any music fans. So there you go.
Well, that gives us kind of like a nice transition into my first one. So, my first TV show is American, famous for one particular host, and I imagine that you would have seen this. So, my first is Fear Factor.
Okay. Oh, yep, yep, yep.
Joe Rogan, I always remember distinctly just being the host that was like shocked and like bemused, like what people were going, like what lengths they were going to. So, do you remember the format at all of Fear Factor?
I don't. I remember seeing some of it. I just don't remember how it went. Yeah.
So when it was originally aired, there was usually three men and three women who were pitted against each other, and it was usually just a variety of stunts. So the prize up for grabs was $50,000, and then later on, it was like changed so that the people that were on the show actually knew each other. What kind of dynamic they're going for, I don't know. But there was a number of controversy surrounding the television. So we talked a little bit about I'm a Celebrity, which has had in and of itself quite a lot of controversy surround it because of the use of live animals and that sort of thing. It's been a bit more limited, but I'm going to run through some of the horrific things that they made people do and also some of the ideas that were rejected. So, one of them was eating a blended rat.
Oh,
So again, like the rat was dead before being thrown in the blender, but I guess the imagery of seeing a carcass of an animal being blended on television, only for someone to then drink it, was
yeah.
horrific at the time. And funnily enough, I'll read you some a little bit about this controversy specifically, because a part-time paralegal in the States sued NBC $2.5 million for airing the show, claiming that he felt so disgusted from watching the stunt that his blood pressure rose to the point he felt dizzy and lightheaded and subsequently vomited. He said his disorientation was so severe that he ran into a doorway and seriously injured himself.
Jeez.
Honestly, unbelievable. The case was eventually thrown out on the grounds of like the First Amendment, but it was obviously a horrific thing for people to witness. Because again, even on, do you know, like I'm a Celebrity. Whilst you see them eat like a pile of worms or something, it's not like, oh god, what's it like sadistic for the sake of sadism, if that makes sense. It's like the whole principle of blending a carcass up on TV for people to watch feels a little bit more sadistic, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's going definitely for that shock value.
Yeah,
I mean, what's the fear of that? I thought the fear should be something scary, something to, put 100 live rats on you, but
yeah.
to blend that up is more about you're just trying to disgust people.
Yeah, again, and this is the thing when it came to Fear Factor, because there were challenges that were like underwater or ones that had like time pressure. I remember them being like on moving cars and that sort of thing. But all of the eating ones just seem as horrifically disgusting as they can possibly be for the sake of being controversial and disgusting. So another one was that they had to. This one's so grim. So basically, this one's just basically. So they had to use a shovel to to fling a roadkill onto a target painted on the ground. And based on how close to the center of the target they got, they then had to eat a portion of the roadkill. So hitting a bullseye meant that you didn't need to eat any. Hitting a like inner
Right.
circle meant that you needed to eat a
Yeah.
small portion. And they just put it on a plate in front of these contestants. Some of them actually did immediately pull out because they weren't willing to do it. But you can watch this on YouTube, and they were forced to eat it with their hands. And again, it's like roadkill. It's like guts and like making some. Again, it's not. It's just a strange challenge in and of itself. Like the whole concept doesn't make sense to me. Like again, at least with the I'm a Celebrity thing, the challenges are loosely related to being in the jungle, whereas this is just let's find some dead animals, a carcass for them to then have to eat on TV. And bear in mind, all of these things were raw. So it's like they've blended
Yeah.
up a
Yeah.
raw
Yeah.
rat, they've turned around and
Yeah.
got a raw
Yeah.
dead animal carcass, and then they're forcing people to gag and throw up on it. It's just horrific. Like honestly, I mean, like I said, I love
Yeah.
a bit of I'm a Celebrity, or I did at least a little bit. But this just feels really different because it's intentionally trying to like torture someone for the sake of a cash prize.
And again, what I would say on that is, because some people will say, well, if people eat meat, then they should also have to see the reality of it, if you know what I mean. But
Yeah,
for me, there's two things at play here, right? One is this doesn't feel like it's something in fear factor. Again, it should be gag factor or disgust factor. It's not fear. It's not putting someone 200 feet up in the air and telling them to walk over a tightrope.
Yeah,
So there's the element that it feels like, again, it's just trying to, not degrade. Degrade might be the right word, but it's trying to make somebody appear weak on TV because they don't want to eat something that's just been scraped off a road and, like you said, eat raw.
yeah,
The other thing for me is it feels really tacky, doesn't it? Right, yeah, we're going to pick up this dead animal
yeah.
and let's fling it at a target, and then which wherever it lands, that depends on which bit we eat.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what it is. Is for me, like all of the challenges are just trying to make something grim as grim can be. Because eating in and of itself, like a dead animal, or like making them eat a rat that's cooked or whatever it might be, isn't in and of itself. It's still a difficult thing to watch because most people wouldn't do it. But it's not making it like horrific for the sake of the entertainment, if that makes sense. And again, this one, you wouldn't think the next one that I'll talk about, in and of itself, isn't terrible. So milking a goat was one of the
Right?
challenges.
Okay.
Except they had to milk the goat with their mouth, then spit the milk into a glass, and then drink the glass of milk when it was full. Like
Yeah,
you've
that's
turned something that just wasn't a thing into trying to make it as disgusting as it can possibly be. And again, I see it as like a little bit of a humiliation thing because it's like, again, with the
a
celebs, I
sexual
think it's
thing, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, it's weird. Like the celebs have kind of on I'm a Celebrity know what they're going in for. They can pull out at any time. People on this are actually going in for a proper cash prize that they might need, knowing that they're willing to do way more than celebrities ever would do. And the image of them sucking on a goat udder is going to be there forever, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so again, it's a little bit like the one where they're like getting them to the show that you've just talked about and the segments that you've just talked about, where it's like, how can we humiliate these people and make this as grim as possible?
If we go back to the first couple, like, I'm not necessarily saying it makes it any better, but I think also from an audience perspective, say like the rat one. Did you say the rat was going to be blended on air, that you would actually see it?
Yeah, yeah. So the rat was blended. It was already dead, but it was blended on air.
I almost think that that is just then more to add the shock value to the viewer, because on I'm a Celebrity, when they do have like they have to eat animals and things like that, it's not like they're doing anything with the animal there and then.
Yeah, yeah.
So like I said, I'm not necessarily saying it's any better, but would it change it if they brought out the concoction rather than doing it live on camera?
Yeah, but also again, like, and this is the thing because I think there's a fine difference. So in whilst I used to enjoy it, but don't now. I'm going to give a bit of a defense, like the I'm a Celebrity principle, because even the foods that they eat there are traditional delicacies of particular regions. That's why they use the animals that they use, because it's like the fermented egg is actually a delicacy that they have and eat in particular parts of Australia or the world or whatever it might be. So to me, there's like a form of legitimacy there. Whereas no one's blending fucking rats in a blender. And so I saw somebody comment on it, and they were like, "This is like the world's worst episode of Will It Blend?"
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, I'm a Celebrity. They are never really going to make them do anything major. It's the draw of that is seeing celebrities put into silly situations.
Yeah,
Some will be scared of snakes or rats, and the food one, like you said, is because you want to see celebrities. Often they pick either the prim and proper ones or like the ones that are really mouthy. You're trying to bring them down a peg or two.
yeah,
But like I said, with this one though, it's let's dangle money in front of desperate people for fame or for money. And yeah, like I said, let's make them do silly things. I mean, I don't think any of these would fit under. If you were to ask me what events would appear in a show called Fear Factor, I don't think I would even come anywhere near to saying those three.
yeah. I'd be like tightrope walking, maybe stuff to do with water and heights. But yeah, I wouldn't say
Yeah.
blended things. And then they did actually refuse one episode, and this was an episode centered around contestants drinking donkey sperm and urine.
Oh man.
Like, which is just like
Yeah.
what the fuck? Like, this seems like a version of Jackass that's like uncensored versus a game about people facing their fears to win a cash prize. So yeah, I just don't think you'd ever get away with it, at least in the way that the original TV show was broadcast. Because they did bring it back for a couple of years, I mean, I think it was Ludacris that did the hosting of the
Okay.
show, but it was never to the extent that it was in those original seasons where it was like truly the horrific shit. And you probably could find an entire compilation of Joe Rogan's facial expressions in relation to watching people do these challenges as
So
well.
he wasn't a competitor. He was like
No,
a
Joe
judge,
Rogan
was
was,
he?
yeah,
Right.
Joe Rogan was just like the host, the presenter of the show
Okay, sure,
originally.
yeah.
But
And I'm
yeah,
sure we must have had a crappy UK version of it.
yeah, I feel like we must have had like some sort of budget UK version, but I never read anything into it because even when I was younger, I always used to watch the American repeats on British television. So whether or not there was a British one, I'm not actually sure.
Yeah, I think what you said there fits in similar to mine. That it just feels like exploitation, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Or exploiting people who want to become famous. Or well, I'm going to say the money's probably. What did you say? Did you say the prize fund on that show?
yeah, 50 grand was what the price one was, which is again, I mean, you know, now it's still a big prize now, obviously, but in the early 2000s, that's an even heftier sum of money. Like 50 grand then was a lot.
It's a difficult one to say, like where we say you couldn't do it because you do have things like I'm a celebrity, but for me, it boils down to on what you said, they're making it into more of a spectacle with the whole act of blending, with the whole act of playing a game with that carcass. I think that is the really tasteless bit on that, other than the
Yeah,
fact they're making them eat it. It's a yeah, we're playing a game with it.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree. Pretty awful.
The thing is, I do remember seeing it, but I don't remember anything like that. Like I said, I thought it was all about maybe having them hold a poisonous tarantula or having them crawl over their face. I thought that's what it would be all about. Right, I'm going to go on to my next one. Now, I'm going to say up front, this is quite a serious one. So, the reason why I wanted to talk about this one is because firstly, it's from 1986, and I was kind of fascinated by the thing of taking again, normal people and doing outrageous things with them, and that it stretches to 1986. So, I mean, you know Noel Edmonds, don't you?
Yeah, yeah,
So, for people who don't, Noel Edmonds was probably like the king of evening entertainment, wasn't he?
yeah, yeah. I would say so.
He did a lot of children's programs sort of in like the 80s and 90s, and then in the 90s, early 2000s, he had a program on BBC One called like Noel's House Party, where again it was a lot of fun and games, and that's where Mr. Blobby, if anyone knows Mr. Blobby, that came from that show. And then he then went on to do Deal or No Deal. But in 1986, yeah, 1983 to 1986, he hosted a show called the Noel Edmonds Late Late Breakfast Show. So again, it was kind of like a variety show. It was a BBC One, and I'm gonna guess it was early evening again. And there was a segment on it called the Give It a Whirl segment. So it featured normal people doing dangerous stunts. Now, there had already been concern over the show's use of these stunts. So the BBC was twice threatened with legal action by a health and safety executive to stop stunts such as plucking a member of the public from an exploding chimney by a helicopter. Yeah. So the BBC themselves described the stunts as some of the most daring feats ever seen on British TV. In 1983, a stunt driver fractured his pelvis and injured his head, neck, and back after crashing at 140 miles per hour during one stunt in an attempt to leap more than 230 feet in a car. And there was a woman in 1983 who broke her shoulder after being fired from a cannon. She would say the BBC don't give a damn, they just want viewers. Now, the one I'm going to talk about, it was actually is really sad and quite distressing. It was in 1986, and I'm not going to say the name of the person, but he was actually killed during first rehearsal for a stunt. So
Wow.
the show was called Hang 'em High, and it involved a bungee jumping from an exploding box suspended from a 120-foot high crane. The carabiner clip attaching his bungee rope to the crane sprang loose from its bolt during the jump, and he died instantly upon impact of multiple injuries. The show was cancelled 2 days later, and he resigned, saying he didn't have. Noel Edmonds said he didn't have the heart to carry on. So obviously there was an inquest into it, and it was a verdict of misadventure. The BBC made a payment of £120,000 to the person's family, while the coroner recommended that safety officers be on hand during any such future stunts. The reason why I say it is not to kind of, it's purely because taking in what we're saying about extreme TV, the fact this was in the 80s, mid 80s, where they were doing things that I don't even think now people would like TV channels would have the inclination to do. And back then, doing a bungee jump off an exploding box, 120 foot in the air, and having someone, a normal member of the public, do it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's amazing, really, isn't it?
It kind of feels though like the potential for someone to get injured is just the whole principle, isn't it? Like that's the draw. And that's like a really dangerous precedent to set. Like when you're setting really extreme stakes and ultimately, like whilst again it's like a terrible thing to say, the producers are probably sitting there being like, these controversies can only be good for us, or like the prospect of a controversy will only be good for us. That's kind of the way that I imagine them looking at it.
I'm not going to say, I'm definitely not saying that the BBC were intentionally put in or thought obviously they were going to put him at this risk. So where in the inquest they had a professional stuntman look at it and saying that basically the safety measures around it were obviously shocking. There should have been more ropes. There was no way for the guy to contact people on the ground if he wanted to pull out. And they also saying that while not contributing to the accident, he had wet boots, which would have been a safety hazard in and of itself. So I think rather than the two we've already mentioned, where it's trying to humiliate people, I think this is trying to make regular people look heroic and stars, but it's
Yeah,
like at what cost? And it's like you're just trying to up that ante
yeah, yeah.
people who aren't trained in it.
Yeah, and this is a good example of where you get to that point and you go as far as you possibly can go. Like this is ultimately like consequence, isn't it?
Yeah, and the fact that there had been warning signs with previous, so yeah, a guy had broken his or fractured his pelvis, injured his head, neck, and back. A woman broke her shoulder, and those were in what you would call, I'll call relatively harmless one because seeing someone jump her in a car, that you've always seen stunts do that.
Yeah, yeah,
The fire from a cannon is like that, almost like that comedy cliche TV thing. Yeah, this just felt, if you were to explain it to someone, it just feels dangerous just explaining it.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree. And you know what? It's surprising that this is the BBC to me.
Yeah, but do you know what? I guess this was 1983 to 86. I
Yeah,
guess nothing like this had probably been done before. It's always a thing that it's takes something bad to happen before rules get put in place, right?
yeah. This is probably very true. Very true.
I just think they got confidence from the fact they were doing these things and getting away with it. And so, if there were people, like I said, I've got no idea how they were selected or if they volunteered to do it. People probably are going to do, if they see it and they can enter it, people aren't necessarily get. I think you're going to think nowadays, anyway, I don't know 40 years ago in the 80s, if I'm going to apply to be on that TV, they're not going to let anything bad happen to me. They
Yeah,
can't be.
yeah.
I'm going to be the
100%.
safest. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm wondering if that was the element of it. So for me, why I chose this is because I found it amazing that, yeah, even that early on they were using non-professional people or non-celebrity people to do these risky stunts.
yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of what amazed me, and it's just a real shame what caused them to stop that feature. Yeah,
yeah.
it's a tragedy.
It's like BBC were trying to be Channel 4 before Channel 4 existed.
Yeah, like I said, I can only think it was at a point of time where they were really starting to maybe push the boundaries of
Yeah,
what they could do. It's difficult to look back at it now because obviously, no, I don't remember this. I don't remember the show. I always remember hearing it discussed in radio shows and TV shows, and it's hard to put yourself in the mind frame of what TV was like in those days. But I think we probably have an idea for another type of episode where we could see how TV shows were, as I said, trying to push the boundary of what could or couldn't happen.
and that's one's really crazy because you feel like you'd still hear about that today as like a controversy that was involved the BBC, but I've never heard that before. Something's gone very, very quiet.
Yeah, I guess because one, it is so long ago, and two, because it probably is so tragic. Lessons have been learnt. They don't do this anymore. And like I said, I was reminded of it because I was listening to an old radio show from probably 2019. So
Yeah,
it is, like I said, it is discussed. you're probably not going to see it on main channels anymore because it's so in the past now, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's crazy as well because 125,000 pounds at the time. What would that be nowadays? That's probably like close to 800,000-900,000 pounds, I would imagine.
The BBC itself were only fined £2,000.
Really?
So after the inquest, let's have a look. They said the BBC was prosecuted in court. The HSE, so that was the health and safety executive, explained the stunt would not have been rehearsed by any professional without an airbag in case of falls, and the stunt experts had told him that even professional rehearsals should have taken weeks rather than days.
Mm.
Exonerated the program's visual effects designer, who had taken a high standard of safety and doubled that to ensure it was doubly safe. However, he explained the show's producer had only discussed the stunt with the safety officer by telephone and reiterated that the safety officer was not present at the rehearsal. The escapologist retained as Lush's trainer was only experienced with theatrical tricks and had not performed the stunt required from the show. The BBC was fined the maximum amount of £2,000 plus costs. The magistrates chose not to refer to the Crown Court, where there would have been an unlimited penalty. So, yeah, sad, very sad. So,
Yeah, that one's actually really quite depressing. I feel like you've brought.
I really was undecided about it. I just think it does show that there is a duty, these TV programs, and now it's almost a different sense. It's for mental health more so than physical health. But I think there's got to be a far greater duty of care because we've seen that go by the wayside, the mental health debate with recent reality shows, right?
Yeah, well, I was going to lead into the next one, but just when it comes to physical health, what program was it that was in a load of trouble? That ski jump one on BBC, was that on
Yeah, the
BBC?
jump. It was called the
Yeah, the
jump.
jump. Well, like,
Channel 4 again, I think.
oh, was that Channel 4? Yeah, well, like
Yep.
celebrities were like legitimately breaking bones every other
Yeah.
week. And I just thought to myself, I was like, how long can this go on for before someone actually dies? Because again, in all the years of I'm a Celebrity, it's been so well done that there's never been a major injury, I don't think, ever on that show, apart from like, somebody gets bitten by a rat or a snake or something. But they've
Yeah.
got people that are there to deal with it and it's minor comparatively. But with that program, it's like actively that was a news story, which again I kind of think feeds into like the way that they want to present the program as like legitimate danger.
Sorry for bringing it down, but like I said, I just think it just highlights that participants should, or audiences should be careful of almost like there's a duty on the audience, although you go along with it, you don't know. You see it on TV, you just presume it's going to be safe.
Yeah.
And the producers, there's definitely got to be a duty of care, both physically and I think in the modern day of mental health to contestants and participants. Yeah.
Yeah, well, again, my next one kind of leads on with what you've just said, because my next show was going to be something that was cancelled relatively recently, and that is the Jeremy Kyle Show.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, this has become more controversial, obviously, in modern times because there's a number of high-profile events that have basically come from the Jeremy Kyle Show. Now, how would you kind of describe the Jeremy Kyle Show to like an American that might be listening to this? I kind of say it's like the equivalent of like a Dr. Phil or a Jerry Springer type thing.
I say Jerry Springer, but a lot less violent,
Yeah,
a
so
lot
Jerry
less over
Springer.
the top. Yeah.
Yeah, Jerry Springer is kind of like set up for them to like have fights, and I feel like it's a bit manufactured, that program. I feel like the people that are there are kind of probably briefed or like actors, whereas the Jeremy Kyle Show is set up to do what really to kind of like expose relationships within families that are like just generally like embarrassing situations, like this person's cheated on their partner with this person who lives down
Infidelity,
the road.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
trying to
infidelity.
maybe almost like interventions probably for some people, for drug abuse and things like that. I'd
Yeah,
say,
like
isn't it?
kids
And
not being like the fathers that think that their dad's not being kids to the children that they've been raising.
I didn't watch it too often because it was always like daytime. But from what I remember, there was always a DNA test involved. Every episode had the
Yeah, yeah,
results of a
yeah,
DNA test,
basically.
didn't it? Yeah.
The problem with the Jeremy Kyle show is again that they had a particular type of person who went on the Jeremy Kyle show, didn't they? And that person was typically somebody who was from a lower economic background, somebody who and the show was set up because Jeremy Kyle in and of himself is actually an intelligent bloke, but the show was set up for him to just take the piss out of people who really couldn't defend themselves.
Yeah, because they would no doubt they were put up in a hotel, given probably money for expenses and to have a night out.
Yeah, and that's kind of was what the premise of the show was. Like, there's inherent, like, there's, again, you can look all of this up on YouTube, but there's literally hundreds of clips of the Jeremy Kyle show where it's Jeremy Kyle talking about how somebody's like got more kids than teeth while they're literally sat in front of it. Do you know what I mean? That was the extent of like what the kind of show was. It became controversial, obviously, recently because there was a suicide that was linked to the Jeremy Kyle show, which was a huge controversy and actually led to the show being cancelled. Now, when I look at how long the Jeremy Kyle show actually ran for, it was originally released in 2005 and it had 17 series until 2019, which to me is fucking crazy because whilst you occasionally saw the odd episode of Jeremy Kyle, it was never something that I would regularly tune into. It was never something that I knew anybody to regularly watch. And again, was kind of all set up around the basis of like relationship, sex, addiction as well was a big one. They used to get like
Yeah,
drug addicts on, and then basically talk to them about how they were just going to die tomorrow. They said that they had like huge aftercare teams and that sort of thing, but there were guests that obviously spoke out about the show afterwards. And in actual fact, there was an altercation on the show that led to a court case, but one of the contestants, not one of the contestants, one of the people on the show actually being charged with like an assault as a result of them
oh wow,
attacking
yeah.
someone on the show. And the judge in the case turned around and described the program as human bear baiting. And I think that that's probably the best way you could probably describe that program.
Yeah, I agree, and I think to answer your point about the 17 years of it or 17 series, I think it's just because it was daytime TV and that was never necessarily a massive audience, so it just got enough. It was probably popular enough at that time because it was
Yeah.
probably something people had on in the background. And I heard I heard the kind of program, like you said, it definitely attracted a certain sector of society, and it is. What did you say it was baiting?
Bear baiting.
No, I thought you were going to say something similar because there was another program that seemed to be quite popular over here. Did you ever watch it? Can't pay or we'll take it away.
Oh my god, yeah, yeah, yeah.
It centers around. It's not bailiffs as such. Is it bailiffs?
I
I
think
think
it
they
is
are, aren't they?
bailiffs. Yeah, yeah, they are bailiffs because they go with like court orders and stuff, don't they?
So it follows a firm of bailiffs, and each episode features one or two sets of people where they're going in to, well, reclaim the goods. Now, often, a lot of these people, some of them are like tenants who are basically taking the piss out of the landlords or whatever, but a
Yeah.
lot of them are obviously people in dire straits. And it was described, and this term has stuck with me, as poverty porn.
Yes. Oh my god. Yeah, yeah,
And I feel the same thing with potentially some of the audience were watching Jeremy Kyle or Jerry Springer. Not saying necessarily these people were poor, but you know what I mean? It's almost like we attach the word porn like horror porn and stuff like that. And that term poverty porn for can't pay will take it away has stuck with me.
yeah. But a beautiful way to describe it. Yeah, I agree 100%. And that's actually another show. But also, like, Jeremy Kyle used things on the show as like a form of legitimacy, which you'd never see. So they always used polygraph tests, didn't they? It was
Oh,
like,
that's
oh,
it.
you've
Sorry,
answered
it
this
was a
question.
yeah, the lie detector
Yeah,
test.
and it's just like these are 99.9% accurate. Well, Jeremy, if they were 99.9% accurate, we'd just put every fucking criminal in one of our courts on one, then wouldn't we?
Yeah,
But they're not. They're horrifically inaccurate. And what you're doing is, again, you're like baiting people into believing a narrative when it might not be the narrative, because there wasn't an episode of that show where there wasn't controversy for whatever reason. Like they had, again, every situation was manufactured based on the people's circumstances. So they then presented the alternative, which was like, this brilliant like story where we're going to help these people, and this is the family that we're going to help. But that was to turn around and counteract the fact that on the same episode, they've turned around and told a dad that he's not the dad to the kids that he's been
yeah,
raising, or they've
yeah.
told somebody that they've been cheating on this person, or they've turned around and exposed an addict for being an addict to their family, or whatever that might have happened. And like there were so many like things that came from that show. Like I'll never forget as well. Like it was a clip that went viral for ages, and it was like, oh, she used a Kit Kat wrapper as a condom. Did you ever remember that clip that circulated on
I
social
think I
media?
heard it in like the papers the next day, or I saw it in the
Yeah,
papers. Yeah,
honestly. And again, it's like stuff like that that was like plastering, like again. And this is what the problem was for me. It was just an opportunity for Jeremy Kyle to be an arsehole. and turn around and
Yeah.
manipulate people who he evidently knew were easy to manipulate. Because, again, like I said, the people that were on this show came from a particularly low socio-economic background. That's just what they were. They were poor, and the reason that they were going on this show is because, like, oh, we're going to give you a polygraph test and DNA testing, which costs thousands of pounds, but you'll be able to find out with us in exchange for all of the dignity which we're going to steal away from you on this show.
I also think the element of appearing on TV is attractive probably to them. And like I said, I'm pretty certain they get probably a couple of nights in a hotel paid for by ITV, a little bit of perceived fame. But what I was going to say, two things is, we mentioned Jerry Springer, but what I would say for all the outrage and the over the topness of the Jerry Springer show, to be fair to him, he didn't, or not overtly anyway, wasn't almost trying to goad
Yeah,
the participants, whereas Jeremy Kyle would really sneer at them, wouldn't he? And he'd
yeah,
get really angry and really lay into them. And
yeah,
often it was at the quote unquote bad party, the bad person of whatever the debate was. But he would
yeah,
really lay into them, whereas Jerry Springer would be right at the back of the audience, just saying the odd comment and letting the people, whether you think that's better or worse.
yeah, yeah,
I do think also that with all these shows, so like Jeremy Cole, Jerry Springer. I don't know what that Dr. Phil one's like. I remember seeing a couple of episodes of it. I do think people, again, there's a voyeuristic element of the audience or the people watching saying, oh, I'm glad that's not us kind of thing. And I think
yeah,
that's probably
yeah.
why it stayed popular. To link into like that poverty porn, it's like looking at people that aren't you, if you know what
Yeah,
I mean.
yeah, I agree. And you know what as well? There's been actually further instances of where like judges and have commented on this. And again, this one is a really good example. So this was again a case that led to criminal charges being made against a person. So it was about infidelity, and a man basically assaulted his female partner, and there are criminal charges that were being made against the man. The woman actually sustained a shattered eye socket and cheekbone and bite marks, which is crazy to think.
Yeah.
In any case, that he's done that. But the judge did say there's plainly an element of cruelty and exploitation in what takes place on the program, and both the couple must have suffered considerable mortification and embarrassment. And that's actually how the show was presented. That was what the intention of the show was. It was to just create the most horrific sense of embarrassment for the people that were on it as humanly possible, I think.
Oh, and that's it. And you saying that has reminded me of one of the point I was thinking of is, and again, I don't know how other shows do it. That I'm sure there is all an element of this, but what I remember about the Jeremy Kyle show is they would bring out the person A or person A and B, and the other person who they were complaining about would be backstage watching it,
Yeah,
and they would leave them there getting fuming, and you could
yeah,
see them getting angry and angry
yeah,
because they haven't got a right to reply. So by the time they let that person out,
yeah,
9 times out of 10, they're going right up into the face of the other people, shouting at them, pointing the
yeah.
fingers, and that anger is already built up to boiling point. So it's a slight it's a really well played manipulation on the part of the producers, I think.
Yeah, and that's the thing for me. The intention of the show was to get someone to throw a punch at another person, because that's why they had like Big Dave or whatever the bloody bouncer was. Do you remember that huge bald dude who was on that
Yeah,
show,
yeah.
like played the bouncer? The reason that
Steve, I
he's
think, wasn't it?
yeah, Steve, Security Steve, and the reason that he's got a character is because they're playing into that fact. Because in reality, you would never see security in an instance if this show was really about turning around and helping people's lives, would you? There'd be no need for them to be physical, to be there and have a presence. You don't see fucking security on display on the X Factor, do you?
Yeah.
Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
It might actually be Steve might be the one in Jerry Springer, because I was gonna say even the security guy in Jerry Springer, the bald guy there, he became famous in his own right. So it says a lot where like the security guard on a show is as famous as the presenter.
Yeah, you have to be looking at what is the intention. Why do we know that? Like, no one knows the name of the security guards who are on set of the X Factor or fucking I'm a Celeb, because again, there must be security these things, but they have set it up in a particular way. And so again, leading into the program actually being pulled, it's because a former guest on the show committed suicide, and the appearance on the show had actually only been filmed the week before, but it hadn't been aired yet. So people turned around and said, "Is there a link?" But you know what happens on the show. You know that the person's had the humiliation of being on
Yeah.
it in front of a live TV audience, right? We have to not forget. You know, unless there's adequate aftercare, which they always turned around and said that there was, but again, there's been so many testimonies of people saying it's been utterly shit after the show. Like, you have to appreciate that these are horrific things. Like, if you are actually talking about addiction or infidelity or like relationships or kids not being yours, whatever it might be, they're traumatic things at the best of times in your own home with no fucking live audience around you. So this is the thing. I just think that, again, if you're going to film shows like this, they actually need to be for a positive purposes. And that's the thing. If Jeremy Kyle show had one instance of someone getting punched in its 17 series, and there was never any like, and they turned around and showed you what had happened with a couple potentially 6 months down the line, you'd look at that and say, well, that's genuine because it's aftercare. They've turned around and showed us where this person's fought their addiction or this person's done this. Whereas it wasn't like that. It was like, let's
Well,
get them on for half an hour, 45 minutes, take the piss out of them, they can fuck off.
yeah. What I will say is kind of like the previous one for me with the BBC is I'm not going to say that the intention was for them to get a punch up. I think the absolute intention is there is to get that compelling TV, which comes from embarrassing or putting a person in an awkward situation with the family, knowing full
Yeah.
well that spark's going to fly. I also, I'm sure that, not every episode was like that. I think some were genuinely helpful. And I think where they could, they probably did help people. But one of the things I remember hearing or reading is that you can offer aftercare to people, but then if the people don't want to take that up and they might be so angry or upset that they refuse to accept it,
Yeah.
then all that's left is the embarrassment of being on there. And like I said, could you imagine the fact that that episode hadn't aired is irrelevant because I think the pressure would have been the fear of that episode airing was probably worse than if it had already gone out and seen it. Do you know what I mean? Could you imagine how the person must have felt waiting for it to be aired,
Yeah,
knowing
yeah, it's
what
like
was
the
going to go?
inevitability, isn't it?
And I think that's probably what ratcheted up the stress level. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
For me, the final thing on that is, we did have a spate of programs like that. I remember when Jerry Springer first came over to the show, and it was at the time it felt like fun because it was this really over the top thing from America that could never happen over here because we just don't do that. And
Yeah,
then all of a sudden, you start getting the shows over here that did.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree.
I'm going to finish with a slightly light-hearted one. It's not necessarily, in the great scheme of things, it's not necessarily outrageous or it's not overly shocking. But again, it's the reason it will become clear. But the reason I picked this is because one, it was a proper game show. It was again Channel 4, so we're getting a theme here for some of the shows that have aired. And Channel 4 was also the home of Big Brother. It only ran a year and it was presented by Jimmy Carr. So
Oh
again,
wow.
it's proper game show. And I'm desperately trying to remember. I can't remember when it aired. I think it was an early evening thing. So I've got in my head that it was like 6 o'clock or 6:30. I could be wrong. But anyway, it was called Distraction, ran between 2003 2004. And the reason why I've included it again is because it's again normal people, but it involved them answering questions while being distracted in various bizarre, painful, and humiliating ways, right?
Right.
There'd be four contestants, two men, two women, usually, and there was 3 rounds in an episode. Before the first round, they learn about each other's embarrassing moments, unique hobbies, strange talents, or unflattering occupations through questions asked to them by Carl. Then throughout the game, Carl would ask relatively simple questions that the contestants must answer while enduring these distractions. Now, these distractions may be inflicted throughout the round, automatically activated by a contestant in order to answer, or as a result of the right or wrong answer. And at the end of each round, the person with the lowest score goes. Now, I remember seeing this, and the sole reason I picked this one was for this one round. And again, this is what I'm saying about the embarrassing thing. So they were put in a specially designed toilet. So imagine you've got four people, and all you see, I can't remember if you necessarily saw their feet, but you saw their heads, but you didn't see anything else. And to buzz in, they would have to urinate in the toilet.
Fucking hell.
So if they urinated, it set off a buzzer. So, it's not the worst thing in the world. But again, it's just that thing of, yeah, do you know what I mean? Would you go on TV to be put on and to answer a question to buzz in, you'd have to urinate. I mean, I probably wouldn't be able to wee under that pressure. I mean,
Yeah, this what I mean. Sometimes, like let's be honest, like sometimes it's a little bit awkward, isn't it? Like, well, but it's just, again, it just makes me just ask the question like, fucking why? Like, why?
couple of the other things. So another one would be they would have to place something disgusting in their mouth, like a snail or a raw lamb testicle, after each correct answer. They would be shot with a paintball gun if they got a wrong answer, or whenever the opponent got a correct one. But they wouldn't wear any protective equipment except for a crash helmet and a face shield. So the rest of they didn't have any
Right.
padding on the body. Some of them sound quite funny, like this one being continuously body slammed onto a cushion mat by a professional wrestler. I mean, that sounds
Yeah,
fun.
yeah. I'd probably quite enjoy. I'd sign up for that
Yeah,
just for free.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Being shocked with an electric dog collar, when they buzzed in. This one was so it must have been in other countries. This was in the UK, Italy, and India only, being placed in an upside down position and tickled on the soles of one's bare feet. Now, I have also heard someone say that tickling is actually quite if you think about it, it can be quite a distressing thing to someone because we know
Yeah,
how bad that is. And if you're then tying them up and putting them upside down to tickle them, it is almost there's a bit of a weird element around that. I'm just going to say that.
yeah. I agree.
And another one in the first round only, they would have to a self-inflicted distraction such as attaching clothespins to one's own face with bonus points awarded to the most successful contestant at the end of the round. Now, just to finish it off, the last person who got through, they would often win like a car. But
Right.
the funny thing about this, say there was a car, they would then be asked, I don't know, say 10 questions. If they got a question wrong, they would have to damage part of the car. It might be they'd have to take like a baseball bat to the windshield, or they'd have to spray paint one of the doors with like green paint. Now, in the scheme of things, this isn't the worst program, but I picked it up purely because in my head, and I remember even at the time seeing it and thinking, my God, that's quite embarrassing, isn't it? Having to be in the toilet and pee. And the fact it was like a basically it was like a proper game show. It wasn't like I said, it wasn't marketed as being like outrageous or anything like this. And again, the fact it only ran a year probably says a lot. Again, it's just that thing about upping the ante and putting people in embarrassing or humiliating situations.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree. It's a little bit. It is a little bit more light-hearted though. I think this one, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's the urinate one because do you not think when you're on the toilet, that's one of your most vulnerable moments almost it
Yeah,
feels like.
yeah.
Do
I
you know
would
what I mean?
agree. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so to have that on it just feels weird on TV. Like I said, you didn't see anything. It wasn't graphic. But yeah, I just thought I'd put it in because yeah, I don't think you could get a game show like that now. Well, or at
Yeah,
least with the round like that, or where you're asking them to inflict pain on themselves. Not in the like I said, it was a Channel 4 production with Jimmy Carr. It wasn't like a again like a Jackass or anything like that. So I don't think you could have it done in the setup of that kind of you can see me. I'm doing the air quotes proper show now.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I think that's a good one. See, now this is sad as well because I've got another one, but I feel like again, like psychologically, it was just a really shitty program for people to put out. So I feel
Okay.
like I'm going to finish on like a bit of a depressing note. But I had Super Size versus Super Skinny.
Well, I've not seen that. Yeah.
Right now, I kind of put this along the same lines as do you know embarrassing bodies, and that's because do you know that Dr. Christensen. Um,
Yeah.
Again, for the Brits listening, you'll know who Dr. Christensen is when I turn around and say the buff doctor with the hair that's like the blonde slick back hair, basically. But for any of our viewers in the states listening, he's like a celebrity doc. Basically, I don't know what the equivalent would be in the states if they kind of have a program similar. But the basis of super size versus super skinny is you get two people with severe eating disorders. So basically, one would be morbidly obese. But again, when I say morbidly obese, I mean like your 30 stone person. It's like really, really at an extreme point. And then you get someone who's basically suffering with anorexia. And that's what it was. And you put them together and you turn around and you basically strip them naked because they spend a lot of the show just in underwear looking at each other. And then there was like I remember a segment at the beginning of the show where they'd have like a tube, and whatever that person ate in a week would like come down the tube. So it's like, what do you have for breakfast? And it'd be
Right.
like, the person that's in the tube would have like just one piece of toast come down the tube, and then the person who was um the one that was overweight or morbidly obese would have like 6 sausages with a full English breakfast and this and this and this, and the whole show was like predicated on putting people in challenging positions. But it's like people aren't ready for that, so it's like they put them on the show and then make them swap breakfasts and expect them not to be disgusted. It's like if somebody's got an eating disorder, they're not solving it on this show just because you've decided to switch the fucking breakfast that they're eating. So they give somebody who's 35 stone or 30 stone a glass of coffee for breakfast and then wonder why they're hungry. It's like, no, this is also not useful because that's not how you would expect someone to lose weight. And putting a full English in front of somebody who's anorexic or potentially anorexic is also not the way in which you'd get them to gain any weight and be a little bit like healthier in terms of, do you know what I mean, combating the issues that they've got. It was just a really strange concept, and in reality just set up to turn around and be like, you're fat, you're anorexic. Do you know what I mean? That's just the way it was set up to be, and it was set up as like a bit of a humiliation thing. It's like, oh, you're eating this much every day, or you're not eating this, and either way, it was like you're going to die because of X, Y, and Z. But you're putting these people who have probably got further to the physical issues that they're suffering with, psychological ones that are probably linked to the physical issues that they're
Yeah, yeah,
suffering,
yeah.
and you're putting them on blast on like national TV when in reality this is something that needs to be seen to by a professional, not by a fucking TV doctor.
What I would say is that program has got two things I'd comment on. One is you've got a chance. You could be helping these people, right?
Yeah,
If they've asked to be on it, they want help, and you're doing it like you said in that way. That
yeah,
it is a what do you call it? It's an attempt at embarrassment or forgetting that maximum shock factor for the viewer, isn't it?
yeah, 100%.
And two, what I was thinking of when you were saying that is if you're doing that because you think you might be able to help people at home, no, because watching that is almost showing it as an embarrassment or a
Exactly.
laughing thing.
Yeah,
So I would imagine the people at home who might relate to the people on it are probably horrified by how they're being treated or being perceived because majority of people in the press they're gonna not be taking that program seriously.
yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. And that's the thing as well. It kind of just made a mockery of the person's physical health and mental health. So, and this is the thing
Can I
again.
ask what channel that was on?
Oh God, you know what? I can't remember, but I imagine that's on Channel 4. I have actually got the page up. Bear with me. Funnily enough, I think you can actually watch it on. It's on Channel 4. Of course, it was on fucking Channel 4. I
Yeah,
think you can watch it
so
on
yeah,
Prime now because I think the
yeah,
episodes are on Amazon Prime. So I would honestly, I would give it a watch just to see what you think. But I just remember that being a show where it's just all predicated on the basis of like, okay, vulnerable people, how can we take the piss out of them? And this is the thing. I think that the way that a show is set up is important because again, even with that show, it's like, what level of aftercare do these people actually get? Like, are you seeing them through to the end of these journeys, which we know are going to be year-long journeys, 2-year
yeah.
long journeys, like a really long time? That can't be plausible. So they're not doing that. Who are you setting them up with? Like, where is the care afterwards? Again, it was just a really weird.
Or even if they are supplying them with the aftercare, the program itself is probably not the right format for addressing the issue that's being addressed, if
Yeah,
you know what I
yeah,
mean. So,
yeah,
so what I'm trying to say is, you can't humiliate someone and then say, "But don't worry, we're going to give you the best aftercare after, but we're going to humiliate you on TV."
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think that last one has actually resounded with me in the fact that you could be helping the people on the show and you could be appealing to people at home, but I think you've lost the. Like I said, I'm not going to speak on behalf of them because I haven't watched it, so I don't know if there was then serious elements or if they offered helplines or anything like that. But I just think if you're watching it and people around you are seen as a bit of a laugh or a talking point rather than a learning point, yeah, I think you've wasted the opportunity.
in my mind, it comes across in the same way that Embarrassing Bodies does. Embarrassing Bodies is set up to be some sort of serious thing where we talk to you, but in reality, it's just like, right, you know that they're not just going to get somebody who's, you know that every episode, irrespective of what it is, somebody's going to walk in there and get their dick out because something. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah.
again, whilst they might turn around and use it to be on the basis that, oh yeah, we've dealt with this person's rash, at some point there was always something that was intended to be a shock, and that was why you watched it. So the reason for watching the show is, what shocking one am I going to see? I don't care about somebody who's got a rash on their arm. I don't care about the person who's got a sore throat. I care about the person who's getting their knob out, or who's getting, do you know what I mean? And that's what it was. It was, again, it's a show that to me doesn't have any validity in what it's trying to do because it's set up in a particular way. It's not like where you've got those programs, what's it called, like GPs All Hours or whatever, where they literally just
Yeah,
follow a doctor's
24 hours in
surgery. Yeah,
A&E.
24 hours in A&E. They literally follow a doctor's surgery and just get people to give, like, they get the people on the show to turn around and then talk about the experience on the show. It's more kind of like of a documentary style as opposed to like the reality TV style. Because I feel like if you're doing anything medical and it's styled to be reality TV versus a documentary, it's never going to come across well.
But what I will say is, what I said to my other half once when we were watching a program that was looking at things from 20, 30 years ago. I wonder what they'll be saying about the programs we're watching now in 20 or 30 years.
Yeah,
It'll be
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
So, yeah, join us in the year 2042 when we're doing a look back. I was going to say something. So, again, like I wanted to say what we said at the start. We've highlighted shows that are shocking extreme, but also I think we're pointing out where they've absolutely gone wrong and what they could
Yeah.
do better, right? I think that's what we're trying to do. Anyway, I think we should wrap up there now. So
We will leave it there. I'll see everybody out if I can get through this without coughing, like I've been pausing throughout this episode. If you've got any other controversial or extreme TV shows that you feel like we didn't talk about that should have been mentioned, do let us know. You can pop us an email at castingviewspod@gmail.com or at castingviews on Twitter. We always love a comment. Also, leave a review if you've liked us, if you've hated us. After the episode that we discussed at the beginning, if you're listening to this afterwards and this goes out afterwards, you probably hate us. But we will have to wait for it to be seen. And I'll leave you all with, we know there are many podcasts from which you can choose, and we thank you for listening to Casting Views.
2, 3, 4. If I want your opinion, I will give it to you. Come on, check what we've got, 'cause you need it. Don't make us get a spark and force feed it. Come on.